Want to open your Bibles back to Acts chapter 16. Appreciate the reading this morning in that, so we will start our lesson from there, Acts chapter 16. It's good to see all of you here today. We do have some visitors. We are so glad to have you, and we would encourage you to come back at another opportunity if you do have that chance. I do want to commend our kids up front, especially our young guys. Of course, the young girls as well. Their leading doesn't do near as well if the girls and all of them are not helping as well. But I was just sitting there thinking, especially when Leighton was up here, it took me, and I'm not comfortable leading singing, it's still to this day, but it took me till I was way on into my 20s before I finally halfway felt comfortable before a group of people. But I mean, these guys get up here and they're doing so well, and that's a testament, I think, to you parents and you grandparents. But let's continue to encourage them. We're so thankful that the elders have allowed us to do this with our kids and give them a chance to be a part and encourage them, and they're the future of our church. So let's continue to and encourage them all that we can. Having said that, speaking of children, speaking of kids, do you ever feel like you're being watched? And I say that kind of jokingly, but seriously, sometimes when somebody's kind of right here over your shoulder, maybe they're kind of off to the distance, you can almost kind of feel that sometimes. I don't know what that is. It's some kind of sense we have. Maybe some of us don't have it. Maybe I'm just weird. But sometimes we kind of feel like, somebody's watching us, or maybe somebody's listening to us. And the reason I bring that up is, as far as the kids, if you have kids or even a kid, there is this underlying real fine print that when you become a parent, you forfeit all privacy rights. I mean, there's no privacy anymore. It seems like they're everywhere at all times and all things, and they hear and see everything. So we're being watched. But we're not only being watched by our children, we're actually being watched by a lot of people on an everyday basis. And a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. Whether you like that or not, that is exactly what's happening. And as God's children, we need to understand that what people hear and what people see in us needs to be what they need to hear and see. Not just what we feel or what we want to do for that day, but we represent God, we represent the church as we're living lives before them. So the question is to you this morning, what are they seeing and what are they hearing? In Acts chapter 16, and again we appreciate the reading this morning, in Acts chapter 16, what has just taken place here is that Paul and Silas has been placed in prison. And they've not just been arrested and placed in prison, they have been beaten. They have been beaten with many stripes, severely beaten, I've always interpreted that to mean. And now they've been thrown into prison. They're being held until the next morning. And from what I understand historically and legally, depending upon what they have done, and to them at this time it was a pretty severe thing. They were pretty upset with them. The next morning they were probably facing more danger. Chances are maybe they were even facing death. Who knows? But we see Paul and Silas in this situation, in an intense situation, in a tough situation, and they're praising God. They're singing psalms and they're praising God, and their focus is on God, not on themselves, not on what they're facing, not on what they've just gone through. I highly doubt they gave them any Tylenol or ibuprofen to help them with their pain. They're probably likely still in pain. And their focus is on God. But we usually go on into this passage and we start talking about the Philippian jailer, and he and his family get most of the attention. Very rarely do we stop in verse 25 and look at this one little phrase here. It's just one of those lessons that's in and of a lesson. But very rarely do we stop and talk about the prisoners who were there. We're really not told anything else about them after this. But Luke did take time to record in Acts chapter 16 that the prisoners were listening. And I would encourage you to understand today, as I strive to remind myself, the prisoners are still listening today as well. We're going to talk about who that represents as we close the lesson. But the prisoners are listening. There's some lessons in that for us. And I hope you'll follow along as we take part in looking deeper into that idea today. The first thing I want to look at is that one of the first things that they notice and that we see here is that they notice who they are praising, and they notice where that goes. Now, I'm going to do something I usually don't do. I'm not a sermon and song type of guy, but I'm going to try to lead us in number 13 in your supplement. So if you want to use your book, fine. I think they're going to put it on the screen here for us, but we're going to look at number 13, You Are the Song That I Sing. I think it'll add a lot to the lesson, and I think it really sets a precedence for what we're going to look at moving forward, because these prisoners are listening, and when they hear us, just as when they heard Paul and Silas, what's the song that they're going to hear? What's the tune that they're going to hear? And what are they going to pick up on? Every day of our lives, and this is really what this song is about. It's not a song that says, you're the song that I sing while I'm at worship. The point is, you're the song that I sing every day of my life. You're what I broadcast out, and praises to you is what comes forth in my life and flows out of my life. That's what this song is about. So let's sing this song. Help me out all you can. Maybe I won't destroy it. And then we'll go on with our lesson from this. All right, let's sing. You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise to your name I will bring. You are the Lord of Lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the song that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing. Now, having said that, is that true in our lives? We can sing that song, even if I led it today. We can all sing that, and that's easy. But is that really the case in our life? When people see us, when people hear us, do they know who we praise in our life? Psalm 18 and in verse 49 says, Therefore I will give thanks to the Lord among the Gentiles and sing praises to your name. Sing praises to your name. Yes, that happens while we're at worship, but more so importantly, it happens how, as we're going to talk about later on in this lesson, how we talk on a daily basis, how we act on a daily basis, and everything that comes forth in our lives in every situation. This is a controlled climate where we're at. Everything is controlled. We're in worship. Everything is orderly and in fashion, and we strive to do that the best we can to glorify God. But when we leave this setting, when we get out of this place, it's not controlled anymore. That's evident from obviously some of the things that happened yesterday evening. There's a lot of evil out there. There's a lot of things that are less than ideal. So what do we sing during those times? What do people see in us? Oh, the prisoners are listening. The question is, what do they see and what do they hear? And it really boils down to this. If Christ is truly the song that we sing, then people are going to hear that. And they're going to see that. And maybe they'll change. But that comes at all times. What I'm saying is, our life cannot be solely about us. We talked this morning in class back here with the young folks about the fact that there's more to us than meets the eye. And one thing is for certain, all the things that we strive and work so hard for in this life, you can't take those things with you. Ultimately, we are going to a place that we can't take any of those things with us. So really and truly, it can't be all about us in this life. We can't preach ourselves, just like 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 5 says. Just like Paul said to the church at Corinth, we can't preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus. And the only thing that we need to be concerned with is being bondservants of His. And if that is our mindset and if that is our attitude, then that will be the song that comes forth in our life. And that'll be what the prisoners hear. What song are you singing in your life? What is the tune that other people hear? The prisoners also noticed that night how Paul and Silas were talking. I doubt they sung the whole time. They probably talked some as well. But even the song has words in it, right? It even has phrases. It even has things that are brought forth in that. What are the prisoners hearing from you? What are the prisoners hearing from me? Let's turn over to Ephesians chapter 4. I'm going to make the same point just in a little bit different way as I made in the first point. This does not just refer to what you're saying while you're at worship. In fact, I think it has very little to do with it. It definitely includes that. But when we're not in a controlled environment, when we're not in that ideal situation, how do we talk? How do we talk at work? How do we talk when we're on vacation? How do we talk in the confines of our home when the doors are closed? What do we say? How do we talk? What comes out of our mouth? You know, the things that proceed from the mouth come from where? Come from the heart, and that's what Jesus said, right? People notice how we talk. The prisoners are listening to how we talk. They noticed about Paul and Silas, and they still notice that today. So what are they hearing from you? Paul said to the church at Ephesus in Ephesians chapter 4 and in verse 29, it says there, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is rather good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you." Now, obviously, that's another lesson in and of itself, but you see the point. What we say matters. Your speech, think about this. As far as your speech and the things that you are saying and how you talk in your life, does it warm a room? Does it encourage those who are there? Does it uplift people who are there? Or does it cause them to want to get away from that room and get away from you? Does your words encourage people to serve God? Or does your words encourage people to make light of spiritual things and to go the way of the world? What are you preaching? What are you teaching? What are you messaging by the way that you talk and the words and the language and the grammar that you use? Not that we're talking about speaking plainly, but I'm talking about how we choose our words. What are people taking from that? What I mean is general conversation. Look at these verses. I'm not talking about that we're making a speech before people and everybody's all ears, but technically that's what's always happening. Whether people looking at you or really engaging you or not, chances are they're probably listening. You'd be surprised how people can recall what you've said and what you haven't said way down the road. Especially if you're a child of God, because they're looking at you anyways. Remember, we're being watched. But just in our general conversation, Titus chapter 2 and in verse 8, he encourages the church, or encourages Titus there to have sound speech that cannot be condemned. I would say that's hard in today's world because people twist things in every which way, but that's them twisting it. But to have sound speech that can't be condemned, that's not a real complicated thing. It's just simply to say and talk in such a way that would be pleasing to God. And not that somebody could use and say, well, you know, you're going to be condemned because of what you said. Well, I can't think of anything we'd be condemned for if we're repeating the words of God and how God would have for us to talk. It goes on to say, the one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. Now, again, people can tweak and twist and interpret however they want to. But honestly speaking, what you are saying should not have any condemnation to come back on you, nor anyone else for that matter. Is that the way that you're talking? Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. In other words, you think about what you say. You don't just throw the food out there and say, here it is, eat it. You fix a plate, you put your food on it, you season it, and you make sure that it's going to taste right. That's how we should go about our talking. Maybe if we took a little bit more time before we said things, and this goes for me as well, but maybe if we thought about what we said in the manner that we fix our plates and season our food, chances are we'd probably choose better what we say. That gives you a little bit more time to process things and to think about, does this edify or does this not edify? Does this glorify God or does this not glorify God? People notice how we talk. They also notice what you say of others. You ever thought about this? The biggest majority of the things that we talk about generally have to do with someone else. Maybe ourselves, maybe we talk about ourselves a lot, or we talk about our loved ones a lot, but still, most general conversations have to do with a person or a group of people. Most things do. And when you think about how you talk about others, well, what are you saying? Are you somebody who tries to find the good in people, or are you somebody who's always complaining about all the bad? Chances are we see a lot of bad and we like to talk about it. That's why these reality shows over the last decade have really taken off. We just like to see other people's business and we like to talk about it, whether good or bad. Chances are we're really intrigued by the bad. We're really intrigued by the drama. We're really intrigued by all the problems, and that's something for us to talk about. Psalm 101 and in verse 5 says, whoever secretly slanders his neighbor, him I will destroy. Secretly slanders. That's not even doing it out in public. We're just kind of doing it behind closed doors. The one who has a haughty look and a proud heart, God says, him I will not endure. What about Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 9? The hypocrite with his mouth. We're going to talk about hypocrites in just a moment. But the hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor. But through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. I ran into some of that this week, not personally, but ran into some of that earlier in the week. Issue with property lines and neighbors who can't get along. And that's a sad thing. It's a frustrating thing. I think we've probably all been exposed to it to some degree. And it's frustrating. And some people are really hard to get along with. Don't get me wrong on that. They just are. Maybe we're one of them. I don't know. Hopefully not. But the hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor. It's almost as if the talk there is intended to destroy the neighbor, and then maybe even in person to the neighbor that we're really nice, but behind closed doors we run them in the ground. Through the knowledge of the righteous, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. Are we speaking knowledge? Are we speaking truth? Or are we speaking slander and things that only tear people down? We're going to have a series of lessons here pretty soon. I thought about starting today, but we may start it here in the next week or two. But so I got some work I want to do on it. But we're going to look at a series of lessons on unity and the importance of that. And part of that is how we talk about other people, namely our brethren. What are you saying about your brethren when you're not here? What are you saying about your brethren while you're at home? Again, kids are listening. Co-workers are listening. People are getting their perception and their angle on the Lord's church based on what you say about your brethren. What are we saying? The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor. James 4 and verse 11, simply do not speak evil of one another. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer but a judge. Not one of us are judges. And it's really not our place to speak evil of anybody or judge anybody. Do we need to point out wrong and the idea to correct it at times? Yes. But if our business is only concerned with just slandering somebody and casting judgment, then the same words in which we use, as the Bible teaches, eventually will be used back to us. With the same degree that we judge others, well, God will judge us. That's a frightening thing, isn't it? People notice how we talk. I tell you what, they also notice what we say about our bosses and about those that we work for. It's easy to blast the managers, right? It's easy to blast those who are in charge. Even if you yourself are in charge, you've got a boss somewhere, and chances are it's easy to get on them. That's why all these presidential approval ratings are all over the place, because it's easy to criticize the ones who are sitting in those spots. But I've always said, whether you agree with them or not, things are a lot different if you're sitting in the spot. Maybe we wouldn't be much better. Maybe we would be. And I do it too. I fuss about things. I gripe about things. And I think that's human nature to do that, but maybe that fussing and griping and all that talk of slander, maybe if that was directed towards prayer to God and all those words were put into prayer asking God to help those people, probably be a lot better off. But it's so easy to not be the servants that we need to be and to run the masters in the ground. I know I'm guilty of that at times as well. It's something I need to work on. I think that's something that we all need to work on. Why? Because the prisoners are listening. They also notice how we act. Paul and Silas were praising God. They were using the correct words to do so. But just the very fact of the nature that they were in prison, just having been beaten and suffered all these things, possibly the next morning losing their life, how they conducted themselves during that tight spot said everything about who they were. And those prisoners noticed that. Listening doesn't just mean, listening doesn't just mean that they were listening to their words. They were also listening to the whole situation, watching what was taking place. People watch to see how we act in our lives. The prisoners are always evaluating us, whether we like it or not. They're always evaluating us every minute of the day. I said this just a moment ago. I want to say it again. As God's people, as Christians, we represent God. We represent Christ, which is, I don't know why people tend to want to shy away from holding the name Christian and being members of Christ's body, because that is with great honor that we can wear His name. Not some group, not some branch over here, but His name. Not some man's name, but His name. We bear Christ's name as individuals and as a body of Christians. We bear His name. Not some other name, but His. And that should come with great weight in this life, that we take a lot of seriousness and a lot of care to how we carry that. We represent God. We represent Christ. We represent Christ's body. We represent the church as a whole. We represent the church here at O'Neill, which is Christ's body. We represent that. It's vacation season. We've already talked about immodesty a few weeks ago, but there's a lot of other things that can come up when we're out of the sight of those that we worship with. What we wear is one thing, but how we act is one thing, and how we talk is one thing. How we appear on social media is another. We represent God in every facet of our lives. I do, you do, we all do. We may represent it in different ways from different positions, but at the end of the day, we're all Christians and we represent God. We represent Christ. We represent the church. What do people see? If somebody didn't know anything about church, if somebody didn't know anything about God or Christ, they just kind of heard of those things, but they knew we were a Christian and they knew that we were a member of His body, what would be their idea of it after they finished watching us? It's a humbling thought, isn't it? And I look back over times in my life where maybe, as I sung with the kids this morning, maybe I didn't exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. And I know I didn't represent the Lord in the way that I needed to. But we can all do better. We can do better, and we can be more cognizant of the idea that we're being watched and evaluated every minute of our lives. Titus chapter 2 and in verse 7, are we a pattern of good works? We should show ourselves to be a pattern of good works in doctrine, showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, good works. Are we doing that? Are we a pattern of good works? I've always been amazed by Paul's statement, simple statement, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Can we say that? Can we say that and really mean it? Can we say that and not kind of cringe to think, man, if somebody imitates me, they're going to look foolish. They're going to bring shame on the Lord's people. Sometimes I'm afraid we want to say, imitate somebody else, but imitate Christ, but not me. But we should be able to say that, shouldn't we? Not as a haughty, not as a prideful thing, but we should be able to say that because we're striving to be Christian people. Friends, we don't need to be like the scribes. We don't need to be like the Pharisees. We don't need to be like the hypocrites. For whatever they tell you to observe, chances are it's probably in line with where you need to be. But don't follow their lead because they say and they do not do. Well, I hope that's not us. I hope we don't say one thing on Sundays and do everything else the rest of the days of the week. Don't be that hypocrite. What a terrible precedence to set among God's people that we would act differently than we proclaim that we are. I think this is about the most simple way that I can say this, but we should not live in such a way that we would be a blemish on the Lord's name and on His people. You know, that's what David did. And David was a man after God's own heart, which shows that none of us are perfect, but we need to understand the gravity of our decisions. David took another man's wife, got her pregnant, and then had her husband killed. And even after he was forgiven, when Nathan came to him, he told David, "You have given great occasion for the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme." Of all the things that I learned in that story, that is the one thing that has always stuck out more than anything else in my mind. David just didn't mess up that day. In a way, he messed up God's people for a long time after that because they always remembered what David did. Yeah, David was forgiven, and that's a great thing, but the ramifications of that lasted for generations. And so it is with you and I. So it is with you and I. If we do not set a good example, we might be the actual blemish on the Lord's church. And that's not what we want to be. Prisoners are listening, and we don't want to be that way. Romans chapter 2, verse 23 and 24, you make your boast in the law, you dishonor God through the breaking of the law. In other words, you boast in God, and you turn around and you do something different, and he says the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. He's talking to the Jews, but the application still applies to all of us. What kind of example are we setting? Maybe the best way to say it is, what kind of representative are we for God, Christ, and the church? Well, the prisoners are listening, and we need to take note. Now, let's bring this lesson more to a close, and let's make some application. What can be said of that midnight prison cell? 3 lessons really come to mind. 1, we see the value of a clean conscience. That's another lesson in and of itself. Don't have time to look at that today. But here are men who very well could have been facing death the next morning, not worried at all, praising God. There is a great value to a clean conscience in knowing that you're in a good relationship with God. And if you're not this morning, I encourage you to become that before we leave. It might mean you need to become a Christian. It might mean you need to be restored. But if you're not in a good relationship with Him, you need to be, because a clean conscience is worth a lot. It's one thing I always I jokingly say, but seriously, when somebody is baptized, I always ask that. I asked Chris that. I asked Daniel that the other night. How'd you sleep? You sleep good when you're on good terms with God. They weren't sleeping that night, but they definitely were on good terms with God. Secondly, we see the value of Jesus and how important it is for His name to be in all scenes of life. Even in the most darkest hours of our life, He has value of changing people's lives. I don't know what happened to those prisoners. We know the jailer's family was saved. Maybe some of them were saved. Maybe their lives were so impressive they were saved later on. Chances are they were pretty bad people. Done some bad things. But they came to know Jesus that night, regardless of how they reacted. But we also see scourged and incarcerated men, regardless of what they said moving forward or did moving forward, they found peace and calm because of what they heard. I find it interesting that when those doors were open in that prison and that jailer was about to kill himself, the apostle spoke up and said, "Don't do that, we're all here." Not a prisoner escaped. Most prisoners, if that door opens, they're out. You ever wonder why they didn't run out? I don't know, and maybe speculating too much, but I tend to lean towards the idea that there was a special kind of calm and peace in that prison cell that night. And why would there be? Again, the prisoners are listening. So the lesson to us is pretty simple. We need to be thankful every day. We need to count our blessings, and it needs to come out in this way. We need to live it out, sing it out, talk it out, and shine it out. That's what we talked about this morning. The things that we live, or how we live, what we sing, what we say, the example we set. 2 Corinthians 3 and in verse 3, we are an epistle, a living Bible. A Bible with arms and legs and a voice and a body that walks around every day. We're God's Bible to the world. What are the prisoners hearing? Now, I want to close with this. I've said multiple times this morning, the prisoners are listening. And you might be saying, well, I'm not in a prison cell, so how does this apply to me? Well, this is how. At any minute, at any given time, the prisoners that we come into contact with might come out of those shadows and walk into the marvelous light of Christ because of you, because of me, because of what they see, because of what they hear, because of what they witness in our lives. But we're not in a prison cell, so who are the prisoners? I'll tell you who the prisoners are. The prisoners are those in the world who are lost. They're in a prison of sin. There are those who are living a worldly life. They represent those who are suffering, those who are depressed, those who are going through hard times, those who are caught up in evil, those who are involved in immoralities. The point is, there are many dark prison cells in this life, and they're all around us every day. So I ask you, what are the prisoners hearing? Well, they're listening. What are they hearing from you and I? Will they hear you? Will they see you? And by chance, would they come to you for guidance? They'll never come out of the shadows unless they see something worthy of coming out. And it starts with you and me. Will's going to stand and lead us in the song of invitation. I encourage you to think about yourself. This lesson is something that I definitely need, because sometimes I forget that I'm being watched as well. Not that I don't want you to feel like you're being spied on, but people are watching. They know who you are. They know who you claim to be. And the sermon that you preach every day of your life means something. It means something. What is it? There's some changes you need to make to your life today. Whether you need to become a child of God or as a child of God to be restored, we would encourage you to make those changes today. If it's something you need to pray privately about, then do that. God will help you to be better. But let's think about the message that we send out every day for the prisoners. Oh, they're listening. If you're a subject, won't you come while we're standing, while we sing?
When the trumpet